Desmond grew up very close to his older brother, Hal. As kids, they spent their days playing and exploring the forest near their home. Their father was a former soldier who had fought in World War I. He survived the war and made it home, but all of his friends did not. That trauma stayed with him for the rest of his life. He could never forget the brutality of war or the moment he watched his childhood friends die right in front of him. Over time, the pain changed him. He became an alcoholic and slowly turned into an angry man. He was nothing like the gentle and loving father he used to be before the war. One day, during a fight between the brothers, young Desmond lost control. He grabbed a large rock and struck Hal with it. The impact was so severe that Hal was left in critical condition and nearly died. In that moment, Desmond was frozen in fear. He realized he had almost killed the person he loved most. Then he noticed a picture on the wall showing the 7 deadly sins, one of them being murder. That image struck him deeply, almost like a spiritual warning. Thankfully, his brother survived. As time passed, Desmond grew into a man who became deeply devoted to his faith. He began helping at a church and lived by every rule and teaching he believed in, especially the commandment against killing. One day, while helping clean the church, an accident happened right outside. Desmond rushed over and saw a man badly injured and bleeding heavily. Without hesitation, he took off his belt and used it to stop the bleeding. The man was rushed to the hospital, where a doctor later told Desmond that his quick action had saved the man's life. Hearing that left him speechless. Once he had almost taken a life. Now he had saved one. While walking through the emergency room, Desmond noticed a beautiful nurse and was instantly drawn to her. From that day on, he found excuses to visit the hospital just to see her. Eventually, the two grew close and began dating. Through her, Desmond started learning about medicine. He studied anatomy from the books she lent him, day after day. Then one morning, during breakfast with his family, Hal walked out wearing a full military uniform. He announced that he was leaving to serve in World War II. The family was shocked, especially their father, who had already lost so much to war. He broke down and begged Hal not to go, but Hal made his choice and left for the battlefield. Not long after, Desmond began to feel a strong calling in his heart. He could not stay home while his country was at war. Eventually, he made the decision to follow his brother's path and enlisted in the army to serve in World War II. That choice would change his life forever. Welcome to Hacksaw Ridge. Desmond finally told his girlfriend and his family about the calling he could no longer ignore. But his choice was different from most. He decided to serve as a combat medic because he never wanted to kill anyone, not even an enemy on the battlefield. Before leaving, Desmond proposed to the woman he loved. When the time came to say goodbye at the train station, his fiancée gave him a Bible with her photo tucked inside. She wanted him to always remember his faith and to remember that someone was waiting for him back home. When Desmond arrived at the military training camp, he met the men who would later become his team. At first, everything seemed fine. He got along well with his fellow soldiers, his sergeants, and the other officers around him. Because their future battlefield would be surrounded by steep cliffs, the training focused on rope climbing and knot tying. Most of the soldiers did well, but Desmond made a mistake and tied the rope incorrectly, creating 2 loops instead of 1. The others laughed at him and mocked the knot, saying it looked like a woman's bra. During physical training, Desmond actually performed the best in his unit. But when it was time for weapons training, everyone picked up their rifles except him. The last weapon left belonged to Desmond. He explained that he could not touch a gun because his faith did not allow him to kill. Everyone was shocked, including his commanding officer. Desmond apologized again and again for breaking protocol, but he still refused to touch the weapon. He was then taken to a higher-ranking officer to explain his decision. There, the commander told him that on the battlefield, the enemy would not care about his beliefs. Without a weapon, he would be shot and killed without mercy. That night, Desmond became the target of bullying from his own teammates. They believed his beliefs would only put everyone else in danger. He was punished repeatedly, forced to clean toilets, run drills, and endure endless discipline meant to break his resolve. Later that night, the bullying turned violent.
Try to sleep.
His teammates beat him badly until his body was covered in bruises. The next morning, the commander saw Desmond's condition and felt sympathy for him. He told Desmond to give up, to go home, and return to a normal life. But Desmond refused. He insisted on serving his country even if it meant doing so without a weapon. When the commander asked who had beaten him, Desmond said no one did. He claimed he had simply fallen out of his bunk. Even while badly injured, he still chose to protect the same people who had hurt him. Eventually, Desmond was placed in military prison for refusing to follow orders and for refusing to carry a weapon. Because of that, he was no longer allowed to take leave on the day of his wedding. His heart was completely broken, knowing that his marriage to the woman he loved had been taken away from him. Later, his fiancée came to visit him in prison, sent by the commanding officer. She tried to convince Desmond to let go of his pride and follow orders by carrying a weapon. But Desmond remained firm in his beliefs. Deep down, he was struggling and confused. He did not know if what he was doing was right or wrong, but something inside his heart kept guiding him to stay true to his convictions. Eventually, the day of the military trial arrived. The court had to decide whether Desmond would be removed from the army or allowed to stay. During the trial, Desmond stood cornered as 3 commanding officers accused him of disobeying orders and being a threat to the mission. Still, Desmond firmly believed that he was not a traitor and not against the war. He explained that he only wished to serve as a medical soldier. The room fell silent. Even so, the law was still the law. Then Desmond's father, a former World War I soldier, arrived with an official letter from the military command. The letter stated that Desmond's decision to serve as a medic was lawful. His refusal to carry a weapon was not personal rebellion, but a matter of religious belief, and the freedom to follow one's faith was protected by the Constitution and could not be considered a military violation. After the letter was read, everyone felt a sense of relief, including the commanders. Even though they had once accused Desmond, they now understood him and allowed him to remain in the unit. Soon after, Desmond was finally granted leave to attend his wedding. Training eventually came to an end, and the soldiers prepared to face the real battlefield against the Japanese army. At that time, weapons were still limited, so the greatest factor in war was the mental strength of the soldiers. Everyone knew how ruthless the Japanese forces were, willing to do unthinkable things, even sacrificing themselves with grenades. When the soldiers heard this, fear began to spread through Desmond's unit. Their morale dropped even further as trucks carrying the bodies of fallen American soldiers passed by. Soon they arrived at the battlefield, a massive cliff known as Hacksaw Ridge. The soldiers climbed the cliff, and once they reached the top, Japanese forces began to appear. Gunfire erupted and many soldiers were killed almost instantly. As a medic, Desmond moved non-stop, carrying wounded soldiers to safety. Some of them were his own friends from training camp. While other medics stayed behind the front lines, Desmond pushed forward into the danger. Time and time again, he came dangerously close to being shot, even though he carried no weapon at all. On the battlefield, there was no more bullying or judgment over faith or beliefs. The men who once mocked Desmond now worked together, watching each other's backs, especially protecting him as the only medic on the front line. Everyone knew that if Desmond went down, many of them would not survive either because there would be no one left to save them. At one point, one of Desmond's fellow soldiers was hit by an explosion that tore off both of his legs. Another medic told Desmond that there was nothing more they could do and that he should only ease the pain before moving on. The man would not survive anyway. But Desmond refused to leave him behind. He carried him to safety and kept telling the others that he could still be saved. Again and again, Desmond returned to the front lines to rescue more wounded soldiers. As night fell, the fighting slowed and the troops pulled back because the darkness made it impossible to continue. But while others rested and took cover, Desmond went back out alone, searching for anyone who might still be alive and in need of help. When he finally stopped to rest, Desmond spoke with a fellow soldier about why he refused to carry a weapon. He explained that not killing was a command from his faith, but choosing not to hold a weapon was his own personal decision. He remembered his childhood when his father often came home drunk and violent. There was a moment when Desmond almost shot his own father, but he stopped himself. That moment stayed with him forever. When morning came, thousands of Japanese soldiers suddenly launched a massive attack from underground. The sheer number of them overwhelmed the battlefield. The troops were forced to retreat, running toward the edge of Hacksaw Ridge to escape. Many soldiers were killed or badly wounded during the chaos, including friends Desmond had trained with. As the soldiers began retreating, even the commanders pulled back toward the base. Desmond stood there, surrounded by the wounded and dying, unsure whether to run or stay. The enemy continued advancing, and the danger grew by the second. In that moment, Desmond made his choice. He returned to the battlefield alone and began rescuing as many soldiers as he could. One by one, he carried them to safety by himself. When he reached the edge of Hacksaw Ridge, he realized he could not lower them down on his own. So he grabbed a rope and tied a double loop knot, the same knot that had once been mocked during training. This time, that knot held strong. One by one, Desmond lowered the wounded soldiers down the cliff, saving their lives. The soldiers guarding the area below suddenly saw men coming down one by one, alive. They were confused, not knowing where they came from or who had lowered them. The commander, who had just arrived at the base, could not stop thinking about the many soldiers still wounded and left behind above. He wanted to help them, but there was nothing he could do. Frustrated, the commander called for reinforcements and requested additional troops to return to the battlefield. But those forces would not arrive until the next day. Meanwhile, Desmond remained alone on the battlefield, unarmed, constantly moving through the chaos while helping the wounded. Even when he entered enemy tunnels and saw injured Japanese soldiers, he still helped them without hesitation. In that moment, Desmond did not see enemies or allies. He only saw people who needed help. All through the night, he kept returning to the front line again and again. He spent the entire night alone on the battlefield, with no one by his side. When morning finally came, the commander was shocked to see that all his soldiers were already in the medical tent, alive. When he asked how this was possible, they told him that Desmond had saved them all by himself throughout the night. The commander quickly gathered his men and prepared to return to Hacksaw. After Desmond finally felt he had done enough, he managed to make his way down safely, escaping the enemy's pursuit. When he reached the bottom, the soldiers could hardly believe what he had accomplished alone. They looked at him with awe and saw him as a true hero. Back at the base, the commander approached Desmond and admitted that he had been wrong. The man who was once seen as weak and selfish for following his faith had proven himself to be a true hero. In the final moments, the soldiers prepared to return to Hacksaw once again. But this time, they refused to go without Desmond. They believed that as long as he was with them, God would be watching over them. As they gathered and prepared to climb once more, they paused and waited. They waited for Desmond to say a prayer for their safety, and that is where the story comes to an end. So the moral of the story is that true courage is choosing compassion over violence, even when it costs you everything.